Hey guys, tonight we slip behind enemy lines, not with a sword, but with a hammer. You're not a warrior. You're not even supposed to be here, really. You're a carpenter from Ithaca, good with timber, bad with politics, and you've just been volunteered to join the siege of Troy. It's been dragging on for nearly 10 years now, and morale's about as stable as a three-legged goat cart. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is over there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in your tent when the messenger arrives, grimy, out of breath, and holding a scroll with your name scrawled across it like a curse. It's from King Odysseus. Just your luck. He's had an idea. The kind of idea that gets people killed or immortalized in bard songs, sometimes both. You're being summoned. Not for war, not for diplomacy, but for something far more dangerous, a meeting with a man who has too much wine and too many ideas. You trudge through the Achaean camp, past rows of bored soldiers dicing with bones, polishing bronze, and arguing about whose turn it is to fetch water. You nod to a few familiar faces, Menelaus sharpening a spear, Ajax flexing at no one in particular, and finally duck into Odysseus's command tent. It smells like goatskin, ink, and arrogance. He's slouched across a pile of maps, half a goblet deep in whatever passes for vintage in this dusty corner of the world. You're the woodsmith, he asks without looking up. You nod. Good, he says. We're building a horse. Pause. A horse, you repeat. Like, with legs? He gestures vaguely with the wine. A big one. Hollow. Something they'll drag inside their city. Gift from the gods, yada yada. Then we pop out and win. There are about 70 reasons this is a terrible plan. Starting with, horses don't win sieges. But Odysseus is already sketching something with a piece of charcoal that looks more like a baked potato than any animal. You're supposed to build this. With what? Hope and tree sap. Still, you don't argue. Not with kings. Especially not with kings known for turning rivals into rumors. That night, back in your tent, you lie awake running through wood loads and stress tolerances. Your mind drifts to the sacred groves where you might have to harvest timber. The groves no one's supposed to touch. The kind that curses you if you even think about carving so much as a flute from them. You try to sleep, but instead, your dreams are full of legs, long, wobbly wooden legs creaking under too much weight. Somewhere, a chorus of Trojans laughs as your horse collapses in the city square. Welcome to your nightmare job. The next morning, you're assigned a small team of laborers. Mostly second-rate shipwrights and one guy who insists he once carved a shrine for Apollo out of driftwood. Great. You're supposed to make engineering history with leftovers. And fast. Odysseus wants this done in weeks. Not months. He's convinced the Trojans are finally gullible enough to fall for a divine offering. You ask for plans. He hands you a doodle. You ask for tools. He says, improvise. You get to work. First, there's the question of size. It has to be enormous, big enough to hold a couple dozen elite warriors inside. But not so big that it'll collapse under its own weight. Historians still argue whether the horse was ever more than a glorified battering ram with a belly. But you're here now, measuring beams, snapping chalk lines in the sand, praying this absurd project won't be your last. You requisition lumber from the surrounding forest, fresh pine, cured cedar, and a bit of ash for flexibility. The saws come out. Chips fly. Your hands blister. By day 3, you've got the frame of a creature that might just pass for equine if you squint hard and tilt your head. At night, the whispers start. Why a horse, some ask. Why not a bull? Or a chariot? You pretend not to hear. The real answer. Trojans worship Poseidon, god of horses and the sea. A wooden horse, they'll think, is divine. A gift. Maybe even sacred. That's the trick. That's the gamble. Still, it feels wrong. Like painting a smile on a trap. Your back aches. Your crew bickers. And somewhere in the camp, Odysseus is drinking more wine and composing victory speeches. You, meanwhile, are just trying to figure out how to make sure the legs don't snap the moment someone sneezes near them. 3 nights in, you finally sketch a plan you think might work. Cross beams, internal braces, a hollowed belly supported by a double-layered rib cage. It's clever. Ingenious, even. You look down at your hands, crusted in pitch and dust, and mutter, I'm going to be blamed for this, aren't I? Probably. You don't sleep much after that. Not from worry, well, not just worry, but because Odysseus now sends messengers to your tent every few hours with new ideas. Sometimes it's a revised head shape, make it snarl a little, like it's warning them, sometimes it's an added compartment, could we fit another guy in the neck, and once, incredibly, a request for built-in latrines. You start to wonder if this is some kind of divine punishment, like maybe you offended Athena by carving her statue a bit cross-eyed back in Ithaca. The blueprint stage is now less drawing and more decoding lunacy. You've pinned parchments across your tent like a conspiracy theorist, red lines and charcoal scrawls forming the shape of something. It looks like a horse. Kind of. If you squint again. But the real headache? Materials. You thought sourcing sacred timber was going to be the tricky bit. And to be fair, it's not easy. You end up smuggling a few choice trunks out of a grove supposedly protected by dryads. One of your workers swears he saw a woman made of bark weeping as the tree fell. You tell him it was probably just the wind and some leftover wine. Still, you don't sleep much that night, either. The bigger issue is keeping this all under wraps. There are over 1,000 Greeks still camped outside Troy, and they're bored out of their minds. Word travels fast when the only entertainment is dice, gossip, or watching Achilles glare at people. Already, someone's been whispering about the beast being built. You have to bribe a few nosy shield bearers to forget what they saw. One you pay with wine, another with a set of extra thick sandals. One particularly gossipy fellow. You give him a plank and tell him it's part of a temple repair. He stares at it like it's going to talk. But the clock's ticking. Odysseus wants the horse standing within weeks, and you've just barely got the central ribcage stable. The neck is a nightmare, too top-heavy, and the whole thing will lurch forward like a drunk cyclops. Your best assistant is a one-eyed carpenter named Linos, who once built siege ladders in Thebes and claims to know how to balance a beast's head with just the right weight of bronze. You're not sure that's even helpful, but he says it with such confidence, you let him attach the snout. Then the winds pick up. Troy's coast is infamous for its sudden gusts, Poseidon's breath, some say, and your horse frame sways like a sapling in a storm. You lash it with ropes, reinforce the leg joints with thick dowels, and finally install cross-bracing to distribute the load. You're halfway through adding the outer cladding when one of your crew drops his chisel and whispers, what if they set it on fire? That thought had crossed your mind. But it's too late to back out now. And then, disaster. One evening, while you're inspecting the rear panel, you notice something odd, a section of the framework has been subtly altered. Not weakened entirely, but enough that a hard jolt could snap a key joint. You trace the sabotage to one of the crew, a surly veteran from Mycenae with a hatred for Odysseus. Caught red-handed, he claims he was just adjusting the airflow. You exile him. Quietly. You don't need unrest this close to launch. But now you're paranoid. Every nail, every beam, every peg must be double-checked. You sleep under the horse now, wrapped in a wool cloak, your tools at your side like a nervous squirrel guarding a cursed acorn. A few of the soldiers start calling it the wooden widow. They think it's funny. You don't. Then comes a breakthrough. A warrior named Antiphos volunteers to test the internal chamber by staying inside it for 5 hours, no food, no water, no torch. When he climbs out at dusk, pale but intact, you realize your air holes and weight balance are just enough to work. Still smells like pine and sweat, he says. But better than my tent mate. The final design is elegant, in a weird, monstrous way. The curve of the belly hides a folding ladder. The legs are solid and tapered with deceptive artistry. You even add decorative grooves to the flanks, swirls and lines suggesting divine craftsmanship, though really they're just your attempt to hide uneven grain. Historians still argue whether the real Trojan horse was life-sized, tower-sized, or just a metaphoric boat. But here, now, under your hands, it's about 30 feet tall and heavy enough that you've had to recruit oxen just to shift it a few inches. Then Odysseus drops by again. This time, with a bottle of something expensive and a grin you don't trust. He looks over your progress, nods approvingly, and says, add a panel in the side. Hinged. Hidden. 4, quick exit. You frown. That weakens the whole structure. He shrugs. So reinforce it. You're the engineer. Of course. Why not ask the overworked carpenter to casually invent invisible door technology? You stay up 3 nights straight perfecting the access hatch. A swing panel disguised as a decorative shield, fixed with silent rope hinges. One tap from inside and it'll drop open. Hopefully. You test it with Linus and nearly knock him off the ladder. Smooth, he says through gritted teeth, rubbing his shoulder. Like buttered marble. The horse is nearly done. You sand the final panels under a pale moon, the smell of cedar mixing with salt air. For a moment, it almost feels like you're working on a temple again. Something sacred. You place your palm against the belly, feel the resonance of the wood. Hollow, yes, but solid. Trustworthy, even. Then you remember what it's for. What's inside? What'll happen when the Trojans open their gates? You start each day now with a splinter in your thumb and an increasingly loud inner voice saying, this is madness. The horse is finished, structurally. Now comes the part no one wants to talk about, making it pretty. Not just presentable, mind you. Irresistible. The sort of sculpture that makes even the most skeptical Trojan priest tilt his head and say, well, that's clearly divine craftsmanship, let's bring it inside the city walls. Which is where the paint comes in. You send a crew to steal pigments from a nearby shrine, yes, you feel bad about it, but you rationalize that this whole war's been a blur of sacrilege anyway. They return with crushed lapis, ochre, charcoal, and some dusty jars of deep red powder that might be expired cinnamon. You assign Linus and the artistic shipwright, who once painted dolphins on a trireme, to start decorating. The goal? Something that looks holy. You go with sunburst spirals, bronze-accented hooves, a long flowing painted mane, and, at Odysseus's specific request, enormous eyes. You want it to look alive, he says, gesturing grandly with a fig in one hand. Like it's watching them. You oblige. The horse's eyes become 2 enormous polished discs of shell and pitch, gleaming in the sunlight like an angry god. One soldier looks into them and mutters, I feel judged. You quietly agree. But the thing that really seals the deal isn't the paint. It's the details. You add small carved panels that mimic sacred inscriptions, fake prayers to Poseidon, symbols of peace, or relief of doves circling a trident. You even convince a scribe to forge a scroll declaring the horse a thank you offering to Troy for their bravery. The scroll gets tucked inside a carved cavity on the chest, sealed behind a thin flap of wax. It's all lies, of course. Layer after layer of aesthetic deception. And it works. One morning, you step back, wipe your hands, and stare at it. The horse. 30 feet tall. Gleaming in the sun. Majestic. Unnatural. And ready. Except now you have to move it. Cue the next logistical nightmare. The beast weighs, well, no one knows exactly. But definitely too much. You've designed it with a broad, flat base and hollow legs to distribute weight, but even so, dragging this thing across the battlefield toward Troy's walls is like trying to roll Mount Olympus on a wet sponge. You round up oxen. Dozens of them. You rig thick hemp ropes around the horse's undercarriage, nail iron runners under each hoof, and build temporary planks across the sand to prevent it from sinking. Then there's the crew. You can't use soldiers, too suspicious. So you round up sailors, spare cooks, and men with bad knees. The goal is to make it look like a slow, awkward retreat gift, not a siege weapon. You hand them fresh tunics and stage a farewell parade of sorts. Shields polished. Flags lowered. Theatric sadness. Like this is all very normal. The move begins just after dawn. And it's a disaster. The oxen refuse to cooperate. One snaps its harness. Two more panic at the sound of a distant trumpet. The horse wobbles alarmingly on its runners, nearly toppling into a cooking fire. You rush forward, shouting orders, adjusting ropes, wedging rocks under the legs. Hours later, it's only moved 50 yards. Men are cursing. One throws his shoulder out. Another tries to suggest putting wheels on the thing and is promptly shushed. Finally, by dusk, the great wooden beast reaches the outer field near the Scian gates, the main entrance to Troy. You plant it there. Tall. Gleaming. Looming. Just close enough to be visible from the walls, just far enough not to seem threatening. And then you retreat. Not just you, everyone. Odysseus orders the camp to be burned, tents torn down, banners removed. Ships are packed, sails lowered. You board yours last, heart pounding. Because now, it's all up to performance. Misdirection. And a little divine luck. The Greek fleet sails just out of sight, tucked behind a nearby island. You're on deck, chewing the same piece of stale bread for 20 minutes, trying not to vomit from nerves. A lookout scans the beach through a polished bronze disc, watching for any signs of movement near the horse. Then it happens. A speck on the beach. A group of Trojans. First cautious, then bold. Children, even. They're circling it. Touching it. You grip the railing and whisper, please think it's beautiful. Please think it's stupid and harmless. Back on shore, they discover the scroll. Then, a curious twist, a Greek left behind. His name's Sinon. A slippery sort, all nerves and poetry. His job? Pretend he was abandoned. Tell a sob story. Convince them the horse is a peace offering, that the Greeks built it to appease the gods and that harming it would bring doom. You don't know if it'll work. Honestly, you don't think anyone does. That night, you sleep below deck, wrapped in your old cloak, eyes fixed on the ceiling. You dream of a Trojan boy tapping the horse's leg, listening for echoes. The next morning, the lookout whispers, they're taking it inside. You don't move. You just stare ahead at the sea, breath shallow, hands clenched. For a moment, you don't feel victorious. You feel sick. Because now it's real. Because your impossible, beautifully absurd construction is no longer yours. It's in their city. And whatever happens next, you made it possible. They say the gods weave fate like cloth, but you're starting to think they just enjoy watching people trip over their own hubris. You wake to shouts on deck, the lookout spotted smoke rising from Troy's rooftops. Not flames, exactly. Not yet. Just cooking fires. Celebration fires. It's working. The Trojans bought it. You sit up, hair stuck to your face with seawater sweat, and try to feel triumph. But instead, all you feel is splinters. Literal ones, still in your hands. And metaphorical ones, stuck deep in your conscience. The plan now is simple, wait. Wait until nightfall, when the horse opens, and the soldiers hidden inside, your hidden passengers, descend into the sleeping city like a nightmare in sandals. But while they wait, you stew. Because something's been bothering you for days now, the inside of the horse. You'd reinforced every beam. You know that. But you also remember the sabotage attempt. And the side hatch. And how Linus swore he double-latched the internal support. Still, wood shifts. Ropes loosen. You start mentally calculating the weight of 30 armored men standing silently inside a hollow belly, not moving, barely breathing, each step echoing through a creaky ribcage. You'd added padding, yes, but not silence. You mutter, please let none of them sneeze. There's a strange rhythm to war at sea. When you're not rowing or fighting, there's just drifting. You spend the next hours staring across the water, watching smoke from the city rise and dissolve like thread in a breeze. Somewhere inside those walls, your horse is standing. Gleaming. Humming with tension. A runner from another ship brings word that one of the Trojans, their priest, Laocoon, tried to warn them. He was shouting something about treachery, the runner says. Then 2 sea serpents came out of the water and ate him and his sons. You blink. I'm sorry, you say. What now? The man shrugs. Straight up. Big ones. The Trojans took it as a sign. Opened the gates right after. You exhale. You're not sure whether to feel relieved or deeply unsettled. Because now it's not just your lie pulling this off, it's the gods, too. Or at least, the appearance of gods. Historians still argue whether the sea serpent story was myth, metaphor, or post hoc justification. But in this moment, it's very real. And it means your creation isn't just a prank anymore, it's holy, in their eyes. That night, you gather with a few of the other officers around a low-burning lamp in the captain's quarters. They're drinking wine and murmuring prayers. You're chewing your nails. I don't like waiting, you say. Who does, says a grizzled captain from Argos. But it's nearly time. And sure enough, just before midnight, the lookout calls down, movement. You rush above deck. In the distance, the gates of Troy are still open. Firelight flickers against the horse's flank. Then, a shape drops from the horse's side. Then another. Shadows unrolling into men. It's happening. Your hatch worked. You can barely breathe. From here, it's just silhouettes. Ghosts flitting across a golden canvas. You see torches catch. Here, faintly, a scream. Then another. The city has no idea what's hitting it. And your hands built this. You wonder if the people inside Troy will ever know. That while they feasted and drank, while they toasted victory over the Achaeans, there was a man across the water quietly praying that his math held. Back on the deck, a soldier slaps you on the back. That's your baby in there, carpenter. You nod. But it doesn't feel like pride. Not exactly. You think about the Trojan children who ran up to the horse, wide-eyed. The women who might have tied ribbons to its tail. The priests who bowed before it. You think about the lies carved into its flanks. The fake prayers. One of your assistants mutters, I hope they make a statue of you someday. You shake your head. They won't. And you're right. They'll remember the trick. The fall. The sack of Troy. But they won't remember the carpenter who held the frame together with pitch, pine, and anxiety. The fire spreads. Faster now. The city glows like a brazier. You think of Linus, probably still asleep on the hold below deck, snoring through history. You think of Odysseus, who will no doubt be the first one off the ship tomorrow, ready to pose for the bards. You think of the horse, your horse, now standing in the center of a crumbling myth. A joke, a weapon, a god in disguise. And you, the man behind the curtain. You sit down hard on the deck, the boards warm beneath you from the heat still traveling across the water. Your hands rest in your lap. Splintered. Raw. But steady. For now. They emerge just before dawn. Your warriors, the ones who were crammed into that wooden womb for hours, maybe the longest night of their lives, are the first to reappear. Filthy. Sweaty. Glowing with something like madness. They're bloodied, yes, but alive. Odysseus is among them. Naturally. He's grinning like a man who just cheated the fates and got away with it. You're on the beach before he even reaches the ships, watching him wade through the surf with an armful of plunder and the swagger of someone who's already rewriting history in his head. He spots you. Well, he says. It worked. You nod, but it's hard to hold eye contact. There's a smear of soot across his forehead and a golden earring in his belt that definitely didn't belong to him yesterday. He slaps you on the shoulder. Told you it'd stand. Beautiful craftsmanship. The legs barely creaked. You want to say they creaked plenty, but instead you just murmur, good. Behind him, others are dragging sacks of stolen treasure across the sand. Priam's palace has fallen. Troy, the city that stood for centuries, that held back wave after wave of Greek rage, is burning. The horse is still standing, half-charred but intact, now surrounded by rubble and smoke. You're told the Trojans welcomed it with a feast. That some danced around it. That they poured wine near its hooves. You try not to think about that. Your job, after all, was to build the shell. Not to choose what would crawl out of it. Still, guilt clings to your tunic like ash. You retreat to your tent on the beach, or what's left of it. Half your tools are scattered, some stolen, others warped from the salt air. You find your old sketches tucked into a pouch, notes on weight balance, airflow vents, internal ladder placement. You almost laugh. Almost. There's a strange emptiness now. For weeks, you lived and breathed that horse. Every hour was sawdust, pitch, pressure. You were the unseen architect of this turning point in history. And now? Now you're just another man among the victors. You watch the others celebrate. They drink and shout and sing terribly off-key. Achilles' men hoist trophies. Menelaus is interrogating some poor Trojan with the slow, cold tone of a man looking for his stolen bride. You walk along the shore, sandals loose, shoulders slouched. You pass a pile of scorched helmets, some Greek, some Trojan. No one's bothering to sort them. Farther down, you find Linas sitting on a rock, sharpening a chisel as if the city behind him isn't still glowing red. You hear, he says without looking up. They're saying the horse was a gift from the gods. From Athena. You raise an eyebrow. Athena? She didn't exactly take up woodworking. He chuckles. Doesn't matter. The poets will say she guided your hand. Or maybe Poseidon did. Who knows? He's right. Already, you can hear the start of the myth forming, carried by half-drunken song across the campfires. A gift horse, divine inspiration. Odysseus the cunning. And somewhere in the background, a carpenter who made sure the legs didn't wobble. Historians still argue whether the whole horse story was literal, metaphorical, or propaganda wrapped in pine. You could answer that for them. But you won't. Back at the main tent, Odysseus is entertaining the bards. One is already sketching ideas for a relief, Trojans hauling the horse through the gates, Greeks leaping from its belly like reborn warriors. You're not in the drawing. You won't be. That night, the camp finally quiets. You lie awake, staring at the stars through the gaps in your tent's roof. The constellations haven't changed. Orion still hunts, the Pleiades still scatter like seeds across the black. But the world below them? Entirely different now. The horse changed everything. You changed everything. And no one will remember your name. The irony isn't lost on you, you built the most famous wooden structure in history, and your reward is obscurity. You could shout from the mountaintops, scribble your name across every plank. But even then, it would fade. Because no one worships engineers. They worship stories. Still, in the morning, you find yourself wandering back to the wreckage of Troy. You pick your way through broken stones, shattered spears, melted altars. You pass the horse. What's left of it, anyway? The paint scorched. The side hatch dangles crookedly. Someone's already tried to carve a heart into its flank, next to the symbol of Aphrodite. The wood's cracked and blackened, but standing. You run your hand across the grain. And for the first time, you let yourself feel it. Not pride. Not shame. Just weight. The weight of the thing you made. Of what it did. Of what it meant. Of what it still means, now lodged forever in the spine of myth and memory. And then you turn away. Because the city is dead. And the war, for you at least, is finally over. You make it exactly 2 steps away from the ruined horse before Odysseus finds you. He's still glowing. His voice hoarse from a night of shouting over victory songs, his sandals stained with ash and triumph. He walks like a man who thinks the gods have personally applauded his every footstep. You coming with us? He asks, chewing a fig like nothing's happened. Where? Home. Or what's left of it? You hesitate. The war's over, yes, but the world you left 10 years ago might as well be myth now. You've built cities, ships, and a siege weapon disguised as art. Going back to repairing fishing boats feels like trying to stuff a lion into a sardine tin. Odysseus squints at you. You should come. You've earned it. You almost laugh. Earned what? A handshake? A statue? A commemorative jug? But instead you just say, I'll think about it. He nods, distracted already, probably composing a speech about his heroism to recite to Penelope when he gets home. He walks off, cloak fluttering behind him, leaving you once again with the smell of smoke, seawater, and burnt cedar. You wander the edge of the ruined city. Not as a looter, plenty of others are doing that, but like someone trying to understand what they've helped unravel. The temples are rubble. The palace is gutted. But the streets, strangely, still hold a trace of life, half-burnt baskets, upturned stools, a child's toy made of woven reeds. And it hits you. You weren't just the engineer of a horse. You were the architect of the end of a world. You try not to let that sink too deep. Later that day, a soldier from Pylos finds you sitting on a stone column, sketching something with a bit of charcoal on driftwood. He looks over your shoulder and says, "What's that?" You shrug. "A storage barn." He laughs. "That's what you're building next." You nod. "Safer than horses." But even that's not true. You're not sure what's next. Word spreads quickly through the camp that the spoils are being divided. Agamemnon gets the lion's share, of course, gold, prisoners, ceremonial weapons. Menelaus is dragging Helen back to his ship, more angry than victorious. And Odysseus? He's already telling the bards how he designed the horse. You don't correct him. One soldier raises a mug in your direction and shouts, "To the man who made it stand." You raise yours back, but the wine tastes like sawdust. That evening, as the sun bleeds across the sea, you get a private visit from Eurylochus, one of Odysseus's captains. He carries a rolled-up hide and a quiet tone. "You didn't ask for a reward," he says, unrolling the hide to reveal a bundle of tools, finely made chisels, bronze clamps, a compass inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "They're yours," he says. From Odysseus. You run your fingers along the smooth wood handles. Does he think that buys silence? Eurylochus shrugs. He thinks it says thanks. You don't believe that for a second. But you take the tools. Because despite everything, they feel right. Honest. More so than coin or stories. Later that night, you sit beneath the stars with your old crew, what's left of them. Linus is humming a funeral song. One of the younger shipwrights is carving a miniature version of the horse out of olive wood. You tell him to make the legs thicker. He laughs and ignores you. I heard they'll be talking about this for centuries, he says. Maybe, you reply. But not the way it actually happened. Does that bother you? You pause. Then, a little. Historians still argue whether there were really 30 soldiers inside the horse, or 50, or 12. Whether it had wheels or skids. Whether it even existed. You could tell them. You could write it all down. Your measurements. Your drawings. The tricks you use to keep it stable, silent, lethal. But then again, what's the point? Truth bends. Myth sticks. And you're already fading into the background of the story like a brushstroke in someone else's painting. Eventually, the Greek fleet prepares to sail. You're offered a place aboard Odysseus's ship. Prime spot. Comfortable. You decline. Instead, you ask for a small boat, a few rations, and the company of Linus. Where will you go? Someone asks. Where they've never heard of horses, you say. It's half a joke. Half a prayer. You leave at dawn, the city smoldering behind you, the horse still standing like a curse made manifest. You don't look back. You sail south along the coast in a small two-man skiff, the kind usually reserved for short port runs or ill-advised fishing trips. Linus handles the sail, humming a song with no words, while you take the rudder and squint against the salt wind. Neither of you talks much that first day. It's not silence, exactly, just a sort of mutual exhaustion that hangs in the air like mist. The kind that only comes after you've watched a civilization burn and realized your hands helped strike the match. By nightfall, you anchor near a cove surrounded by cliffs and sea pines. You eat bread so hard you briefly consider using it as a chisel. The stars come out, unfamiliar in this part of the world. Orion's there, of course. He always is. But the horizon feels bent, tilted slightly by the weight of what you've left behind. I keep hearing creaking, Linus says, staring at the stars. You glance at the boat's mast. No, he says. Not here. In my head. Like wood shifting. You nod. Same. It takes days to shake the sound. You'd spent so long listening to the groan of rope, the shudder of boards, the secret language of stressed timbers that your brain now refuses to let go. Even in sleep, the horse haunts you, not the violence of it, but the tension. The endless waiting inside a beautiful lie. Eventually, you reach a coastal village. Small, sun-baked, suspicious. You tell them you're shipwrights looking for work. They don't ask questions, just point to the harbor and say, that warehouse needs a new roof. And so, for the first time in years, you build something that won't collapse on people on purpose. There's a quiet pleasure in it. No deadlines. No generals. Just sun on your back and the smell of honest wood. You shape beams, mend boats, teach a boy how to use a square properly. Your hands remember things your mind had long filed away, how to balance a joint by feel, how to read the grain of cedar like a map. It's a small life, but it fits. You rent a small room above a bakery. Linus sleeps in the loft. You fix carts, build shutters, even design a rather clever dovetail hinge that impresses the local priest so much he commissions a new altar. No one knows who you are. And that suits you fine. But the past has a way of finding you. One evening, while you're shaping planks in the village square, a trader passes through with scrolls from the mainland. News, poems, stories. You're not paying much attention until you hear a boy reciting loudly for a crowd. And lo! Cunning Odysseus, with divine inspiration, designed the mighty horse that broke the will of Troy. You freeze. The boy keeps reading, dramatic and breathless. There's mention of Athena, of flame and vengeance, of Greek glory etched in the grain of pine. There is no mention of the man who held the beams in place. Who counted every nail. Who lay awake wondering if his creation would stand, or kill the men inside it. Linus glances at you. You shrug. Told you. That night, you don't sleep. You go to the beach and sit in the sand, watching the tide breathe. The stars blink above like indifferent gods. Historians still argue whether Odysseus was truly the architect of the horse or just its strategist. Some even claim it was built by divine hands, conjured fully formed by Athena herself. You imagine Athena with a hammer and chisel, muttering about load distribution and tight joints. You almost smile. Back in the village, your horse is smaller now, metaphorically. The one that lived in your mind. Its hooves don't thunder anymore. Its eyes have dulled. It's just wood. Just clever engineering, wrapped in poetry. A few months later, a traveling bard asks if you've heard the story of Troy. You say yes, vaguely. He performs a version where the horse flies. You don't even correct him. Because by then, you've come to understand something important. The truth doesn't survive in stories. Only symbols do. And sometimes the symbol is more powerful than the truth could ever be. Still, once in a while, when you're alone in your workshop, planing a plank or fitting a peg just right, you whisper the measurements to yourself. Just to remember. The height. The width. The bend of the false panel. The way a man's breath echoed in the hollow belly. Your truth, quiet and sturdy as oak. You're planting a fig tree behind the workshop when you hear the crunch of foreign sandals on gravel. Two men. One short, stocky, with the look of a soldier grown soft from too many months on land. The other lean, sun-leathered, and wrapped in a cloak that seen better days. Neither wears the badge of any known city-state. They ask for the carpenter who worked under Odysseus. You stare at them for a moment, the shovel still in your hand. The fig sapling tilts slightly in its pit, roots exposed to the breeze. Never heard of him, you lie. But they already know. They say your name like it's a relic, something etched into the back of a lost scroll. You haven't heard it spoken like that in years. You're needed, says the taller one. A monument's being commissioned on the mainland. They want accuracy. The horse, exactly as it was. You laugh. Actually laugh. Because of course they do. Not the lives it held, not the war it ended, just the shape of it. Something to be sculpted in bronze or marble and installed in a city square, where pigeons will crap on its head for generations. You decline. Firmly. But they linger in the village for 2 more days, asking around, talking to your apprentice, watching as you work on a new fishing boat. When they finally leave, you feel like a door has creaked open somewhere. One you thought had been boarded shut. A week later, a different visitor arrives. Alone. Younger. A scholar, judging by the ink stains and the cautious way she steps around the woodpile. She doesn't say she's here to interview you, but the scroll peeking from her satchel disagrees. You sit her down. Offer her bread. And then, unexpectedly, you talk. You describe the central beam, the one no one sees, but without which the horse would have folded like wet papyrus. You tell her about the joints carved to swell with moisture, locking tighter with time. You even sketch, a little, in the dirt beside her sandal. She listens. Doesn't interrupt. And when you finish, she simply says, "Thank you." That night, you go back to the fig tree. Its roots have taken. New leaves sprout, pale green and waxy. And you realize you've finally done something that might outlive you, and not because it burns cities or wins wars, but because it gives fruit. Shade. Peace. But of course, the past doesn't truly go away. Not when you've built one of history's greatest illusions. You start having dreams. You're inside the belly of the horse, not as an engineer this time, but as one of the soldiers. It's dark, thick with the scent of pitch and sweat. Every creak makes your gut clench. You hold your breath as footsteps pass outside. Then the dream shifts. The walls melt into Troy's gates. You walk forward, and everything is on fire. You wake up sweating. You try sleeping in the loft. Then downstairs. Then not at all. One morning, you carve a miniature horse from driftwood. Just a toy. 6 inches tall. Hollow inside, with a lid. You leave it on the bakery counter with a note, for Linus's niece. She's 3. She won't get the reference. But Linus will. He picks it up later and turns it over in his hands for a long time. You don't speak of it. You never really talk about Troy anymore. Or Odysseus. Or the smell of pine tar and the sound of the gates opening. Still, the horse is always with you. It's in the weight of the mallet, the angle of the grain, the way a joint fits snugly into place. It's in the creak of ships at the dock, the echo of your own steps across wooden floors. Historians still argue whether the horse was a literal siege engine, a metaphor, or some mistranslation of a siege tower or battering ram. But you know better. You know it was real. And worse, it worked. Sometimes, when people tell the story in the village square, they get the details wrong. They say the horse was pulled in on wheels, no, it was dragged. Or that it was life-sized, as in, horse-sized. No, it towered above the walls, absurd and magnificent. You want to correct them. But you don't. Because legends don't need your help. They grow without you, twisting up like vines. And after a while, even you start to forget which parts were real and which were just polished. So you plant another tree. Apricot this time. And the days stretch on, quiet, creaky, and filled with sawdust. The past rides with you, always, like a passenger. But at least now, you're the one steering. They say the gods have a flair for the dramatic. You'd agree, especially after hearing what happened on the shoreline. You're not there, of course. You're back with the ships, exiled from your own masterpiece. But word travels fast among the Achaeans, especially when it involves sea serpents, screams, and a priest whose timing couldn't have been worse. Laocoon. That was his name. A Trojan priest with enough common sense, and bad luck, to suspect that a massive hollow horse parked outside your gates might not be the generous parting gift it pretends to be. He tried to warn them. Loudly. Publicly. Spear in hand, eyes wild. You can imagine the scene, the man sweating under his ceremonial robes, shouting into the crowd like a raving drunk, spitting phrases like, Greek deception, and, burn the thing now. Then the serpents came. Two of them, coiling from the sea like vines with scales and teeth. One for him, one for each of his sons. A horrific scene, by any measure. You're told the crowd screamed. Some tried to run. Others fell to their knees. In the chaos, the horse simply loomed, quiet, still, waiting. And just like that, the tide turned. The gods had spoken, apparently. And the message? Stop asking questions. Of course, that's just one version of the story. Historians still argue whether Laocoon's death was divine punishment, unfortunate coincidence, or a poetic later addition to make the horse seem divinely sanctioned. Either way, it worked. After the serpents had dragged their feast back into the sea and the priests finished interpreting omens, the Trojans decided the horse was, in fact, a holy offering. To destroy it would be sacrilege. So instead, they rolled it through the gates. You weren't there to see it, but you've replayed it enough times in your mind to feel like you were, the crunch of the wheels on stone, the creaking of the frame, the murmurs of the crowd. Maybe children ran beside it, laughing. Maybe the elders frowned and muttered. Maybe someone whispered, "It's bigger than I imagined." And inside, 30 men, cramped, sweating, silent. You know the space intimately. You could navigate it blindfolded. You built the hidden air vents, disguised as carved decorative slats. You crafted the handholds along the inside wall so the men could climb out quietly. You even hollowed the belly in such a way that footsteps would echo softly, not thunderously, when the time came. All your ideas. All your calculations. Now moving through the enemy's gates, disguised as reverence. The horse sits in the center of Troy for the rest of the day, a centerpiece of celebration. You imagine music, dancing, wine poured until amphorae clatter to the ground and soldiers forget where they left their helmets. After 10 years of siege, the war is suddenly over. The Greeks are gone. The gods have been appeased. It's a perfect lie. And lies, when wrapped in ceremony and blood and grief, become very hard to untangle. You sit at the shoreline with the others, pretending to play dice but really just listening, ears tilted toward the wind, hoping for any sign. It's like waiting for a distant storm. Everyone's tense. Even Odysseus is pacing, which is never a comforting sight. The ships are anchored just beyond view, tucked behind a nearby island, sails down, oars ready. The plan is simple: wait until midnight, when Troy sleeps. Then light the signal fire, and let the warriors inside open the gates. The rest will flood in. But no plan survives contact with reality. The hours drag. One sailor pukes. Another chews his fingernails down to raw. You mostly sit. Still. Silent. And then. A flicker. On the ridge above the city. Small. Brief. A flame that appears, then vanishes. The signal. Someone whispers, "It's begun." And your chest tightens. Not with excitement, but something else. A slow, creeping pressure like a plank warping under heat. This isn't a carpenter's pride. This is dread. Because your design isn't just holding 30 men anymore, it's holding the fate of an entire city. Every joist, every peg, every silent hinge is now history's fulcrum. If even one part fails, you try to shake the thought, but it lingers like resin on your hands. The boats slide quietly through the waves. The soldiers crouch, eyes forward, breath shallow. You're not rowing, you've done your part. You just sit, watching the dark shape of Troy grow closer. Somewhere in that city, your creation is waking up. Midnight folds over Troy like a velvet curtain, thick, quiet, and filled with secrets. You're not inside the horse. You never were meant to be. Your job was to build it, not to ride it. But still, you know what's happening within every plank and bolt at this very moment. Your breath sinks with the men's inside as they shift, stretch, quietly test limbs that have been crammed for hours in oak-scented darkness. The outer world is silent. Torchlights flicker low in the streets beyond. You imagine distant snoring, wine-stained lips parted mid-dream, limbs sprawled in post-celebratory heaps. The city is sleeping sounder than it has in a decade. Your horse waits. Inside it, warriors inch upward. The belly you shaped with sloped curves and support rails is now a tunnel for feet and daggers. You crafted the ladder rungs yourself, iron nails hammered in just right so they wouldn't squeak under leather boots. There's a pressure in your chest as if you were inside too, ducking and crawling, praying every beam stays quiet. A small hatch opens beneath the horse's flank. This was the riskiest part of the design, not the size, not the structure, but the silent release. A single creak would have alerted guards. You greased the hinges with a mix of goat fat and olive oil, every inch sanded, every gap tested. You even lined the edge with scraps of lambskin to soften the sound. And now it swings open. Silent as a secret. Out they spill, First 2, then 5, then all 30. They move like spiders in the dark, clinging to shadows, dashing toward the gates. One of them is Ippias, the only other person who touched the internal bracing. You taught him how to unbolt the latch that keeps the horse from rocking dangerously once it's empty. His hands, you hope, remember what yours showed him. From the ridge where your boat has just landed, you spotted the gates of Troy, yawning open like a beast's mouth. A signal torch flashes once from the wall. Inside the city, the warriors you helped insert are cutting throats, unlocking door bolts, mapping death across sleeping neighborhoods. Behind you, the rest of the Achaean army rises from hiding like waves summoned from mist. Sails are drawn. Boots strike sand. Thousands march in silence, gripping spears, swords, and unfinished vengeance. There's no bugle. No rallying cry. Just breath and sandals and the quiet hunger of a 10-year siege finally about to end. And your horse. Empty now. Sitting where they left it. A shell. A carcass of deception. And yet, the most important weapon of the war. You cross the threshold into Troy just behind the vanguard. Smoke curls from the first fires, where Achaean torches have caught the edge of a market stall or a linen awning. You step over a fallen guard, his armor glinting faintly in the firelight. There's shouting now, confused, angry, desperate. Doors are kicked in. Arrows whistle past. Chaos has replaced the calm. It's everything you feared it might be. You spot your horse from the plaza, now lonely in the glow of flames. Someone's painted something on its side in hurried red slashes, Trojan letters, you think, though you can't read them in the smoke. A woman screams. Somewhere, a child wails. A temple roof collapses behind you with a thunderous crunch. A soldier dashes by with a bag of silver ornaments clinking on his back. Another throws a torch through a stained glass window and laughs. You do not laugh. Because it's happening now, because of you. Your hands, your tools, your brain turned into a siege engine. There's a strange moment where you stand in front of the horse, just a few yards away. You look up into the eyes you carved, fake eyes, painted with crushed lapis and soot, designed to look noble and tragic. They seem almost alive now, blinking with the heat haze. You remember the first nail you hammered into its ribs. You remember the night Odysseus first pitched the idea while absolutely soaked in wine and hubris. You remember arguing with Menelaus over whether it needed a mane. It didn't. You added one anyway, more convincing. And now here it is. Silent. Still. Victorious. The gates are open. Troy is falling. And all because a handful of Greeks decided storytelling was stronger than swordplay. You didn't swing a blade. You didn't climb a wall. You just built something no one thought to question. Your foot scuffed something on the ground, part of a broken lyre. It's still warm from the house fire behind you. Someone once played this. Maybe even the night before. Maybe while singing about how the war would never end. You turn from the horse and begin to walk toward the palace district, where Odysseus is likely already climbing steps, sword in hand. The heat of the fires brushes your neck like a breath. There are no cheers. No medals. No songs just yet. Just the sound of a city unraveling, and the quiet heartbeat of wood and smoke behind you. Morning comes, but it's not the kind of dawn people write poems about. The sun doesn't rise, it sneaks in behind a curtain of smoke. Red and smeared like a bloodshot eye, it watches the city with neither warmth nor pity. You stand near what used to be a garden square. Statues of Troy's founders have toppled in the night, some cracked at the neck, others blackened by fire. Ash drifts past you like snowflakes with nowhere to land. The scent is hard to describe, burnt cedar, blood, scorched cloth, something metallic you pretend not to recognize. Troy is gone. Not in the mythical sense, not in the tale for future generations sense. Literally, gone. Walls breached, temples looted, families scattered like grains of wheat. The palace has been stripped bare. Priam is dead. His sons too. Even poor old Cassandra, who tried to warn them all, is nowhere to be seen. And your horse? Still there, absurdly untouched. Some Achaean soldiers have begun carving their names into its legs, like drunk teenagers tagging a tree. One even tried to pry off a chunk as a souvenir before slipping in the blood pooled around its hooves. You didn't help him up. You walked the streets slowly, like a museum visitor after hours. Only this isn't art. It's aftermath. Someone has gathered a group of captives in the forum, mostly women and children. Some look dazed. Some are weeping into the folds of their smoke-stained dresses. A few stare right through you. You don't blame them. A little boy, barefoot and soot-smudged, points at your tunic. You realize you're still wearing the tool belt you had on during the landing. A chisel dangles from it, absurdly clean in a world now dripping with consequence. He doesn't say anything. Just points. Then he walks away. You wonder who he'll grow up to be, if anyone lets him. Historians still argue whether the horse was truly the decisive factor or if Troy was simply out of food, out of allies, out of will. Some say the city was doomed the moment Helen left Sparta. Others claim Troy's fate was sealed the day it trusted the gods over common sense. But none of that matters when you're walking the ashes. Theories feel paper thin here. You pass a mural that once depicted the goddess Athena offering her shield to Troy's warriors. It's charred at the edges now, and the goddess's face has flaked off. There's a black smear across her hand. She's not offering anything anymore. Back in the harbor, the ships are preparing for departure. Loot is being sorted, catalogued, fought over. Odysseus is barking orders, mostly ignored. Menelaus has vanished into the crowd with a woman who might be Helen, or might just be someone he's decided is close enough. You haven't seen him since the gates opened. Nobody's talking about what happens next. The city is falling, but the silence is rising. An awkward quiet has settled over the victors, as if they're trying to process the enormity of what's just occurred and failing. They look at each other and realize, there are no more battles to plan. No walls to scale. No enemy to outwit. Just ghosts. You find Hippias near the edge of the agora, sitting on a chunk of broken column. He's sharpening a blade with short, angry strokes. You sit beside him, but neither of you speaks. There's nothing useful to say. After a while, he grunts, "They're calling it your horse." You nod. "They're saying you won the war." You shrug. He snorts. "What a joke. You built a prop, and now they'll name cities after you." You look over at the massive wooden shape still parked at the city center. Bits of smoke curl lazily around its legs, like cats. Its wooden sides are dark with soot but still intact. A child runs past it, giggling, someone else's child, probably an orphan now. "Not a bad prop," you murmur. Hippias finally cracks a smile. "No. Not bad." He doesn't say thank you. But then again, you didn't ask him to. Somewhere behind you, a priest is trying to salvage relics from a collapsed shrine. Two soldiers are arguing over whether a gold cup is sacred or lootable. You watch the city get picked apart like a carcass, each rib and tendon pulled for trophies. And in the center of it all stands the horse. Some will call it genius. Others will say it was the ultimate act of cowardice. Few will know how much time you spent measuring weight distribution so it wouldn't tip when rolled. Fewer still will care. But they'll remember it. That's the trick, isn't it? Wars don't just end, they echo. They get rewritten by poets, cleaned up by scholars, polished for bedtime retellings. Someone will say your name wrong in 1,000 years. Others will say you never existed. And a few will whisper that you were the devil himself, smiling as the gates open. You stand up. It's time to leave. As you walk away from the ruins, your boots kick up dust that might once have been marble, bone, or song. The air is warm now, thick with memory and mourning. You don't look back at the horse. You already know what it looks like. You're aboard the ship now, standing near the prow as it slices through the Aegean. The wind bites, but the salt air is somehow cleaner than anything back in Troy. The sea doesn't judge, it just moves. Steady, endless, ancient. Behind you, smoke is still faintly visible on the horizon. Not a column, more a smudge, like someone dragged a thumb across the sky. Troy, reduced to a charcoal fingerprint. No one speaks much on board. The men are exhausted, emotionally flatlined. Victory doesn't feel how they imagined. There's no singing, no wine-sloshed dancing. Just quiet chores, coiling ropes, checking supplies, avoiding eye contact. You notice a few glancing at you, and not fondly. You're the man who made the horse. The man who ended the war. Or maybe the man who made it worse. Someone once told you that glory makes people nervous. That seems right now. You find a corner near the steering oar and settle in, wrapping your cloak tighter. The nights at sea aren't gentle. Beneath you, the ship groans, a low, wooden creak like an old man sighing in his sleep. You shut your eyes, just for a moment, and suddenly you're back inside the horse. The air stale. The dark endless. The memory claustrophobic. You jolt awake. Even now, safe and free, you can still hear the faint creak of the wood above you, like ghosts walking across a wooden ceiling. It's just the rigging, but your body doesn't know that. Historians still argue whether Odysseus, Menelaus, or even Athena should get the credit. Some say it was Poseidon's will. A punishment for hubris. Others think the Trojans sealed their fate centuries earlier, by trusting walls more than wisdom. You know better. It was wood. Nails. Patience. And fear. You built fear. One day into the return journey, a storm hits. It's not just bad, it's personal. Waves rise like fists. The sea roars. Sailors scramble, shouting prayers to gods who are suddenly very popular again. You cling to the mast as the boat lurches sideways. Lightning cracks, and you half expect to see Athena herself standing atop a wave, glaring down like a disappointed schoolteacher. But there's no divine punishment. Just water, and more water. The storm rips a sail. Snaps a beam. One man goes overboard and doesn't come back up. No one even shouts. It's too dark to see him, too loud to hear his name. He's just gone. You survive. Of course you do. It's almost annoying. By morning, the sea calms as if nothing ever happened. You pass a small island where goats graze near the cliffs. One bleats at you as the ship glides by. It's the most normal sound you've heard in weeks. You think of home, not a place, more a concept. That dusty little village where you learned to measure things by the width of your thumb. Where you first built a birdcage out of olive wood, and your uncle said it was good enough to trap a god. You didn't believe him, but you liked hearing it. You wonder if your house is still standing. If your neighbors remember you. If anyone there has heard of the horse yet. They will. You glance toward the back of the ship. Your crate of tools is still tied down, lashed in tight. There's a gouge in one of the planks, you recognize it. Made it yourself, years ago, when you were working on siege ladders. It's funny the things that last. At the next stop, some anonymous port town, you disembark. The locals don't recognize the soldiers. No cheering. No procession. A few curious glances, maybe, but that's it. Victory isn't viral out here. You're given a room in a tavern. It smells like fish stew and wet sandals. You sit on the edge of the bed, running your fingers over the rough wool blanket. Everything feels normal. Offensively normal. Later, you hear a bard playing in the common room. His lyre is slightly out of tune, and he keeps losing the beat. But he's telling the story. Not your story, exactly, his version. The horse was 10 stories tall. Odysseus carved it from mountain stone. Inside were 100 flaming swords. He doesn't mention you. You sip your drink. It tastes like vinegar and regret. Maybe that's for the best. Fame is a torch, and people love setting fire to whoever holds it. You'd rather not burn. Still, it stings. You sleep deeply that night for the first time in ages. No dreams of hollow chambers or collapsing walls. Just blackness. Peaceful. Quiet. When you wake, the sun is already high. You stretch, breathe, and for a moment, you forget who you are. You're just a man in a rented room, with sore shoulders and an itch on your calf. You smile. Then you stand, gather your tools, and walk outside. There's always something to build. You walk. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way that bards like to sing about. No cloak fluttering, no thunder rumbling behind you. Just slow, steady steps down a dry coastal road, your pack bumping gently against your back and your knees complaining with every incline. The war is over. But you aren't sure what that means for you yet. You'd assumed, for years, that your life would end in Troy. Either by a spear, a sickness, or the slow rot of waiting. But now, the story has unspooled further than you expected. And the pages ahead are blank. A small farming town appears on the horizon, nothing more than a handful of clay-tiled roofs nestled among wheat fields. Chickens dart across the road as you approach. One pecks your boot, unimpressed by your engineering resume. You ask for work. A man points you toward a half-finished barn, its beams listing at a crooked angle. You nod, spit in your palms, and get to it. It's strange, how natural it feels, real wood in your hands again. Not a holy monument, not a war machine. Just a shelter for goats. No one's going to hide in this thing to slaughter a city. You measure twice. Saw once. The beam fits. By nightfall, your shoulders ache in the satisfying way they used to back before kings and gods got involved in your carpentry. The farmer offers you stew. You sit on a stool by the fire, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, and eat like a man who finally has both appetite and time. Someone mentions Troy. The locals only know the shape of the story. The war lasted forever, the Greeks won, and there was something about a horse. One man thinks it was a golden horse gifted to the goddess Artemis. Another says the Trojans rode it themselves. A child insists it was actually a lion. You stay quiet. Because here's the truth, the world doesn't need the facts. It needs stories that fit inside a song. You know that better than anyone now. Still, when you go to bed in the loft above the goats, you find yourself sketching the original blueprints on a scrap of parchment. Just to remember it right. Just for you. The next morning, someone's already moved your tools. They thought you were leaving. You weren't, but maybe you should. You're not a barn builder, not anymore. At least not only that. The idea comes to you as you watch a boy push a wooden cart with a cracked wheel. You could teach. Not in a temple, not at some gilded school for aristocrats' sons. Just here. To the people who build things every day but never learned why certain beams sag, or how to make a pulley without invoking a god. You ask around. A few are curious. One woman brings her son and a rusted chisel. Another shows you her husband's half-finished boat and asks why it leaks sideways. You set up a small bench outside the tavern. Each afternoon, a few more people wander over. You explain the strength of triangles, the value of counterweights, the elegance of the dovetail joint. You draw in the dirt. You carve models from driftwood. You become something between a teacher and a local eccentric. And you laugh more than you did in 10 years of war. Quirky side note, one student tries to make a chair shaped like a crab. It collapses immediately, but he insists it's a philosophical statement. You suspect he just liked crabs. Historians still argue whether the Greek engineers of the Trojan War period were true scientists or simply craftsmen with good instincts. Most records are vague. Your scrolls, if they ever survive, will be equally unclear. After all, no one writes down the important stuff while it's happening. One afternoon, a traveler arrives from the east. Dusty, loud, full of stories. He mentions in passing that someone in Mycenae is building a colossal wooden bridge over a marsh. Something never tried before. Your fingers twitch. Not out of envy. Out of curiosity. You ask questions. He shrugs. Doesn't know the details. But the challenge lingers in your mind like a loose nail in your boot. That night, you stare at the stars and wonder if you're meant to keep moving. If this town was a resting place, or a waiting room. You've never stayed still for long. Even in Troy, you paced the workshops like a caged dog. Maybe you build the horse because you were bored. Maybe boredom is the real villain of history. You pack your tools again. Leave behind your little class. The crab chair kid gives you a seashell and says it's lucky. You nod, smile, and pretend you believe him. You follow the road east, towards something new. The bridge, the marsh, the next great structure waiting in your head. Because here's what they never tell the bards. When you build something big enough, something mad enough, something sacred and strange, part of you never stops building. Even after the doors close. Even after the fire. Even after the story is sung. You're not the man who built the horse anymore. You're the man who remembers how. And that's almost better. Your feet lead you through olive groves and across dry riverbeds. The sun grows softer as you head east, the land flattening into lazy marshes stitched with reeds and silent frogs. The traveler hadn't lied, just outside Mycenae, there it is, a massive wooden framework stretching halfway across a swamp, like the ribcage of some drowned god. You stare at it from a ridge. From this angle, the whole thing looks wrong. The load is misbalanced. The pilings are too shallow. A good storm would knock half of it sideways like dominoes. Still, the ambition makes you smile. Down at the base, a team of builders hammers in rhythmic chaos. No formal engineers in sight. Just muscle and mud, young men squinting at stone markers and shrugging at every problem. So you walk into camp. Nobody stops you. Nobody ever stops a man carrying a satchel of tools and an air of mild superiority. You find the overseer, an older fellow with a sunburnt neck and the exact expression of someone who didn't ask for help but desperately needs it. You don't brag. You ask where they keep their timbers. 10 minutes later, you're up to your knees in muck, showing two boys how to brace a pylon properly so it doesn't tilt every time a goose sneezes nearby. They listen. You sense hunger in them, not for food, but for better ways of doing things. By nightfall, someone has given you a cot. You don't say who you are. You don't mention Troy. Not yet. Here, you're just another pair of hands. And maybe that's enough. The days stretch into weeks. You rework the support layout. Redesign the joints. Introduce a system of color-coded knots to keep the team from hoisting beams upside down, again. Someone makes a joke about tying your ego to one of the supports just to see if it floats. It's a good joke. You laugh harder than you should. At some point, they start calling you Old Sawtooth. You don't know why. You don't ask. Nicknames are like that. One evening, by the campfire, someone brings up the war again. I heard the horse was hollow, one man says, poking at his stew. And full of snakes. Nah, says another. They say it sang. Made a noise like thunder and then the gates fell. You listen, quiet. The story's mutated again. Now it has legs like a stag and was carved by blind monks. One version has it built out of stone and cursed by Apollo. Another claims it was real, a divine beast turned to wood by a wizard in disguise. Historians still argue whether the Trojan horse even existed. Some say it was a metaphor for a siege engine or an earthquake. Others insist it was purely poetic, the way myths hide inside facts like seeds in a pomegranate. You could correct them. But why ruin it? Later that night, a young builder named Raylan catches you alone, sorting through scraps of timber. You really build it? He asks. You don't answer right away. Instead, you hand him a chisel. Ever carve a spiral notch, you say. He shakes his head. So you show him. Slowly. Step by step. A good spiral is all about steady pressure and knowing when to stop. Like stories. Raylan becomes your shadow after that. Follows your instructions, asks sharp questions, picks up on tricks even you forgot you knew. You show him how to strengthen a truss without adding weight. How to waterproof rope with pine pitch and beeswax. How to balance a load using nothing but a pebble and a taut string. He learns fast. Almost too fast. One morning, he presents a miniature model of the bridge, one you hadn't built. It improves on your design. A subtle tweak in the lower frame reduces tension by almost a third. You feel an emotion both rare and dangerous, pride. It's terrifying. Because now, you see what might come next. You're not just passing time anymore. You're building a replacement. By late summer, the bridge nears completion. The marsh water flows smoothly beneath it. The supports stand solid and sure, like they've always belonged there. You've painted no names on them. Left no mark. But you know where your work lives. Quirky aside, someone nails a small wooden horse to the bridge's entrance. No one claims credit. You suspect Raylan. You let it stay. As the final beams are fitted and the first cart rumbles across the planks, the camp throws a celebration. Bread, wine, shouting. A few builders try to reenact the fall of Troy with painted masks and too much improvisation. One plays the horse. You're fairly certain he's drunk. The fire crackles. The bridge stands. And for the first time since the war ended, you feel something close to peace. It doesn't last long. Because the world always needs things. New walls. New towers. New mad ideas turned into timber and sweat and rope. You receive word, a merchant town to the south wants an amphitheater built above a cave system. Something that won't collapse under stamping feet and bad poetry. They've offered coin, housing, and, most temptingly, complete creative freedom. You ask Raylan if he wants to come. He says no. He's staying. Someone has to look after the bridge. You leave the next morning, pack slung over your shoulder, the sky already gold and full of dust. You don't look back. After all, you built it to last. The road south bends along salt-crusted bluffs and lavender fields, past flocks of goats and villages so small their names are never written down. You travel light, just tools, parchment scraps, a small blade for fruit and trouble, and a new pair of sandals that already have a hole. Word of your arrival somehow precedes you. When you reach the town, a bustling port just beyond the hills, the local council is waiting with figs and bad sketches of their dream amphitheater. They call it the Echo Bowl. Half circle. Stone base. Raised wooden seating. Built into the mouth of a dormant cave so the actors can emerge like shades from the underworld. You bite into a fig and say, "This is going to be impossible." They take it as a compliment. Construction begins in fits and coughs. The cave's mouth is wider than expected, and a family of very territorial bats has claimed the upper tiers. You spend your first week coaxing them out with smoke and flute music, none of which works. Eventually, you just wait until winter, when they migrate somewhere less noisy. The cave ceiling leaks. The wind whistles through the lower levels like a jealous ghost. At one point, your best mason accidentally opens a tunnel to a buried temple and flees screaming about curses. You plug it with stones and say nothing. Still, you build. You design a hollow stage that echoes a whisper to the back row. You draft supports that fold like fingers around the cave walls, transferring weight into the hillside. You install trick platforms and rope-pull trapdoors, just enough sorcery to impress without inviting too many gods to interfere. One day, you find yourself sketching a horse in the margins of your measurements. Not a large one. Not Trojan. Just a little doodle. But it makes you smile. You miss Raylan. Sometimes. A courier brings you a letter, no wax seal, no flourish. Just words on plain bark paper. It reads. The bridge still holds. Someone carved your name underneath. I told them not to. The marsh floods twice a year now, but we brace early. I hope you're still teaching things. The trick with the string and pebbles saved us a day's work last month. P.S. Still no idea who nailed the horse. You fold the letter carefully. Keep it in your pack with your old compass and the bit of rope from the horse's belly. The amphitheater is finished at dusk, 1 year after the first figure. You test the acoustics by whispering a joke from the back tier, something about Achaeans and leaky boats, and the actors on stage burst out laughing. You don't tell them that wasn't a test. You were just thinking out loud. The town throws a festival. Fire eaters, liar songs, oily bread, and far too many people telling you you're a genius. You nod, sip wine, and look at your hands. They're still rough. Still scarred. Still steady. And then it happens. A young girl, barely 10, probably a merchant's daughter, tugs at your cloak and says, "Did you really build that giant horse?" You glance down. Her eyes are wide. Unafraid. Depends, you say. Was it filled with snakes or thunder? Neither, she says. My tutor said it was a trick. A big trick that changed everything. You smile. Then yes. I helped. You sit with her a while, drawing simple pulleys in the dust, showing how levers work. She's bright. Asks questions. Corrects you once, and you let her. Maybe she's the next you. Or the next Raylan. Or something else entirely. Historians still argue whether engineers like you ever really existed. The records are vague. Names misattributed. Dates fuzzy. Some say the horse was the work of gods. Others claim it never had wheels at all, just raw faith and gullible Trojans. But you know. You know the creak of pine. The weight of rope. The way genius hides in sweat and laughter and last-minute fixes with spare nails. And now, with the echo bowl filled with applause, the torches burning low, and the stars easing into the sea like glowing seeds, you feel it again, that quiet peace that only comes after building something that will outlast you. Just before midnight, you step away from the crowd, into the hills. You whisper a thank you to nothing in particular. And maybe, somewhere, wood shifts gently in the wind. And now, my friend, as your breath slows and your eyelids drift downward, let's leave our master engineer here, his hands finally still, his legacy gently echoing in the laughter of children and the creak of distant bridges. The fires have burned down to embers. The towns have grown quiet. Somewhere, deep in a cave, a trapdoor waits for its next cue, but not tonight. Tonight, the world softens. The past fades into warmth and haze, like a story half remembered in the morning light. You've walked through war, through myth, through the mind of a man who built legends out of timber and twine, and still found room for kindness, for teaching, for quiet satisfaction. So let your mind wander gently now. Float backward, or forward, or just still. You're safe here, wrapped in the hush of history, where even the noisiest siege must eventually fall silent. Thanks for staying with me.